we were just talking before we went on. Amy and myself and Brian we're all recovering from a weekend of a little bit being under the weather. But my good news is, despite not feeling great, I still kept to my routines. I did my sauna, I did my cold plunging. So as I was sitting in pretty cold water this morning with a cough and like not feeling great, I'm like, dude, maybe this isn't the best idea. But I was more concerned with sticking to my guns on my discipline than I was maybe making my cough a little bit worse. So before we get into the subject and the conversation, I'd love to hear some good news. Pop it in the chat, just something over the weekend that went well, something that you're doing right now that is working well. So give me some good news in the chat. Love to give you a shout out. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to pop something in there, and then we'll get going. Amy, why don't you give us some good news while everybody's typing?
I
It
was
looks like
just
you're
typing.
typing.
I was just going to booked an awesome venue for a really cool event that we're going to be doing in May. We're going to piggyback on the RealX conference, so I'm really excited about that. Do a live watch party.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. My good news for you, Amy, is you're crushing it on social. Like, you're back in your, when Amy and I first got to know each other. Yeah, you're crushing it. When Amy and I first got to know each other, she was kind of the queen of YouTube. She was the first person I saw using it really well. And at that time, Amy, YouTube was all about just property promotions and things like that. Well, now it's become so much more personal branding and content creation, and you've been crushing it lately. So maybe give everybody an idea of what changed, or what you're doing that seems to be working.
I did a 30-day challenge actually with one of our team partners on our team who also wanted to ramp up their social presence. And so we did a 30-day challenge where we posted consistently, no matter what. Yesterday's the only day that I missed, and it's because I literally was like throwing up.
Yeah.
It was so bad for 24 hours. So, but yeah, no, it's honestly been great. It's just being consistent. It's knowing, getting insane clarity around who your audience is and what solutions you can deliver to the pain points that they're experiencing in their life or in their business, and just addressing those, talking about them, being as raw and real and authentic as you possibly can. And that's what's working for me. And my followers and my engagement is going up substantially because of it. But the consistency is what matters. Can't wait to post either today or tomorrow when I get a chance, but I can't wait to talk about the real stock. It's crushing.
Yeah, no kidding. It's been
crushing.
Actually, cautionary tale for all of you real agents. I sold not any of the shares I've gotten from Real, but just my own little, I had bought 50,000 shares or whatever. I sold them at 350, and I was like, I'm going to buy back in when it goes down. And it went back down. I set up a purchase at 250. It got to 256, never executed. So I literally have like $100,000 sitting in an E-Trade account, and I'm just waiting. Now the stock's way up. And so I'm like sitting there, and it sucks, but I almost timed it right. I'm the worst stock guy ever. I sold 50,000 shares, and I was like, I'm going to just buy in 80,000 shares when it dips again. And it hasn't dipped again. So I'm a freaking idiot. All right, well, let's move on. Angie got to the gym this morning after being on NyQuil all weekend. Hopefully not too many people are sick coming home from spring break. Matt Jones, too busy open houses. Melinda Moore closed on a house, which is great. Christina had a successful delivery. 7-pound baby girl. Congratulations.
Oh, amazing.
Slowly coming back, not to lose momentum. Today is my first baby girl's 18th birthday. It's the worst. Like, it's the worst. I'm like, why don't you just be 12 forever? I'm your hero. We can watch episodes of The Office together. Like, every Friday is date night with dad. And now she's 18 and it sucks. But congratulations. All right. Brian Gubernick, for me, AIM. So there's so many voices in real estate.
Yeah.
And it's actually not a good thing. It's not a good thing, right? Because it's like, how much content can we receive? How many voices can we listen to? How many opinions can we take in? How much can we execute on people's advice? So at Spring's event, maybe a few of you were there when I spoke, I got up and I said, everything you've heard for the last 3 days is completely useless, unless you actually apply some of it in your life. And so, like, I'm just being blatantly honest with you guys. From a mentorship and coaching perspective, there's very few people I listen to, not because I know it all, but because I could run around like a freaking tiger chasing my tail, if it's like every time I hear something good on Instagram or TikTok or in a webinar like this, I just instantly apply it. Well, one of those voices is Brian Gubernick. He's somebody that Taylor and I have had a coaching relationship with for almost a decade. Taylor and I have been with Brett Tanner for a long time. Brett introduced us to Brian. Brian's with Place. We're a Place partner, and so like one of the main decision factors for us in partnering with Place was knowing that we'd have a priority coaching relationship with Brian. He coaches our leaders. That's how much I believe in what he has to say. Is literally, I'm like, one of our guys will ask us something, and I'm like, to be honest, I don't know. Why don't you ask Brian? Because he's just so good. So anyways, Brian, that's my 30,000 foot view. Give everybody a 1 foot view of you, like who you are, where you come from, how you got into real estate. Like, give us a Cliff's Notes.
Dude, you can't set it up like that. I feel like I'm just going to be a giant letdown after that lead in, but thank you for all of those kind words. And I am going to lose my voice here today, so I will apologize right out the gate. I have been a little under the weather. You know, we were talking beforehand. I went on a 5th grade field trip last week. Those little freaking monsters, you know, me and like
human petri dishes.
I mean, literally, I went to one field trip and it just kicked my ass. So I'll be all right though. I'm really excited to be chatting with all you guys here today. I've been at it for a little while, Joe, as you know. I was licensed in 2005, started selling in February of 07. So I'm about just over 17 years into a real estate sales career. I'm in Phoenix. I got into real estate because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. When you're in Phoenix, when you don't know what you want to do with your life, you go get a real estate license. And so that's what I did. I got into it in 2005, 6, 7, which is, again, if you want the perfect time to start a real estate career, it's Phoenix, 2005, 6, 7. I think I saw Andrew Monahan on there somewhere. He can probably relate to that because he remembers Phoenix 2006. Like me. And so jumped into it then, was an investor, failed as an investor, which led to a sales career focused on distressed sales. And I'll spare you all the details. My career started there and it took off because I focused on that niche, that's distressed sales. It kind of put me on the map and it allowed for me to expand my team into other states and get into brokerage and title and mortgage and coaching and training and all these fun things that our industry provides for. Today, I spend most of my time as the chief real estate officer for Place, which basically means I get to work with, you know, our top teams and coaching and strategizing with them, as well as, you know, help run our executive team. And then the other portion of my time I spend running Metrics, which is a mastermind that Ben Kinney and I run together that meets every quarter. And so, you know, I like to say, you know, having been at it for a little while, and I think all of our objectives should be the same. I've just got a few more W's than L's right now. And I think that's how I kind of play my career. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to go undefeated, but if I can just, you know, win enough to maybe get in the playoffs. And once I get in the playoffs, I have a shot at the title. I'm cool. Right. So I think as it stands right now, I'm not knocking everything out of the park. I've just got a few more wins than I have losses, and it's played well for the time being. And so it's been a real fun ride. I think we are in the greatest industry known to man. I say that sincerely. I'm not trying to get anybody excited about real estate necessarily. Hopefully you all already are. But we are in an amazing industry. There's very few things, I think, Joe, and you know this, it's very few industries, if any, where you could go to school for 9 days, come out and make the same amount of money or more money than a guy or girl that's already sold 5,000 homes before you. That's just an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And so I love what you do.
Yeah. So let's talk about this, because there's two things that I wouldn't say obsessed with, but I'm curious about. So Moneyball is interesting to me. The Oakland A's are moving to Vegas. And obviously there's, you know, if anybody's watched the movie before, like super good. I mean, Brad Pitt is amazing. And just the story of like using data analytics to play a sport. And then now it's not too much of a secret that I play a decent amount of golf. And it's funny, you get into the golfing world and the same thing, right? Like you could get your real estate license and a day later make the same amount of money as someone who's been doing it for 20 years. Well, outside of like maybe Augusta, where they're playing the Masters, like you could go play any golf course that anyone's playing. And in theory, I have the ability to hit one shot better than like Tiger Woods. I can make a hole in one on a hole that Tiger's never made it on. And on that one hole and that one thing, I could be better than him. Well, there's this data analytic process called Decade Golf, where it's like, it's not about making a hole in one on every par 3 and things like that. It's literally about saving 0.2 strokes on a hole and compounding that over time. So golf, CrossFit, cycling, like I've literally tried everything. I'm somewhat convinced that I would prefer to live a long life than a short life. And while I'm living that life, I would prefer to be healthier than sick. And so I'm always like, right now my kick is HotWorks, which is like basically like it's totally like 99% of the people that go there are women. And then there's just me. And it's like cycling inside of an infrared sauna and stuff like that. Well, it's because I'm committed to going like, I just got to get a little bit better today, because over the long haul, if I'm a little bit better today, then the compounding effect will make me better. Today, we're going to talk about 7 things that people could do to improve their business. And I have a feeling that they're not necessarily a compounding 7. It's almost like there are some options to be better. And it's you could do Pilates, you could do CrossFit, you could do yoga, you could do cycling, you could do whatever you want. You just got to be doing something. So Brian, talk to us a little bit about these 7 things, because I would imagine some of these people are doing 2 of them or 4 of them or whatever, but there's different ways to improve our business. Like there's different ways to improve our health. So let's get into those 7 things.
You know, first of all, I love all that you're saying there. And the reality is, as we go through these 7, and yes, we're going to talk around business today, but I think I'd say something similar about health or relationships. It's the basics. Like this, I feel like I'm going to disappoint everybody, because I'm not going to give you some like crazy tool or process you've never heard of before to double your business. I actually think, gang, everyone listening here right now, or that will listen to this, down the road, you already know pretty much everything I'm going to say. You really do. I think we know all of the answers. Here's why I believe this, and this might sound like a silly analogy. But it was this big aha I had recently. A few weeks ago, Joe, I was teaching this class, and the class, I've been with Keller Williams for a really long time, and I've been part of Gary Keller's mastermind for a long time. And I wanted to teach this class around the things I learned from Gary. I don't care what brand you're with. We all could agree that Gary knows a few things, right? And so I've got, I kid you not, thousands of pages of notes from Gary Keller's masterminds, from personal phone calls, from text exchanges, from email exchanges. I've been around like his mastermind for about 14 years. So I've compiled a lot of notes, and I'm like, I want to write a class on the things I've learned from Gary Keller. And I'm like, this is going to take me forever to write, because how am I going to go through 1,000 pages? And so I started going through the pages, and of course, you know exactly what I found, right? I found myself writing the same stuff down in 2017 that I wrote down in 2014, that I wrote down in 2012. And every time I'd write it down, I'd highlight it, I'd asterisk it, as if it was the first time I ever freaking heard it. What I learned through this process is I had 1,000 pages from Gary. There was only like 15 to 20 like core thoughts. Like it was the same stuff over and over again. I just was hearing it differently. In other words, there's not a whole lot of new ideas in business. There's not a whole lot of new ideas in success. When we start talking about doubling our business or things we can all be doing, again, I really believe we all know these things, and I'm not going to shock anybody today, Joe. I think I'm just going to remind you of stuff you already know.
One thing to consider too is what it takes to double your business. So if somebody's watching this and they're like, dude, I did 8 transactions, going from 8 to 16 is relatively easy. For our team, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of transactions, sometimes maintaining is tough, but we've got to double our efforts in order to maintain. So like everybody's got to individually apply, because like if you're like, man, I did 4 transactions last year, I promise you, just by not being a maniac, you could get to 8. Like getting to 8 is easy. Now, if you're Angie Lauer's on this call, and she's done 55, 60 units before as a solo practitioner, getting to 120 is going to take something special. And so it's like doubling becomes harder the more you do, but you can always double the effect of what you do. Or you can, a lot of times, Brian, like you could double your income without doubling your production. There's a million ways to do it, but go ahead.
Yeah, and so I want to start there because I think it's a really good point. When we start talking about doubling, I think it's going to mean something different to everybody. And Joe, that's really where I want to start, in that maybe it's double your income. Well, there's ways you go about doing that. Maybe it's double your unit count, right? Double your volume, double your free time. I mean, so I think the term double is so broad, but the way we're going to look at it today is pretty much from a doubling the volume or unit count that you're doing, okay? The first thing I want to start with, and again, you've already said it, we already know it. I'm sorry that I'm going to start with this one, but I have to. If you want to double your business, double your effort. And again, I apologize, but it's just so true. I look at stats all day, every day. I meet with agents pretty much all day, every day, the highest performing agents across the nation. I would contend, Joe, that I probably spend more time talking to top real estate team owners than most anybody across the nation, just given the nature of what I do. And I look at their stats and I know that if they want to double certain elements of their business, instead of making 20 calls a day, it goes to 40. Instead of making 10 door knocks, it goes to 20. Instead of, mailing 10 letters, it goes to 20. Like, it is literally a double of effort. Even when it pertains to, like, I don't want to go off on a total tangent, but if you want to really improve a relationship, double the amount of times you say, I love you. Double the amount of date nights. Like, it sounds goofy, but we have to start with acknowledging that if you want to grow your business, it will require more effort. Period.
So what's the resistance there, Brian? It's like there is this, like we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like we want to double our business. Yeah, we want to double our business, but we don't want to double our work ethic. How much of what you've seen relies on people just, I say this a lot, but just stop being a maniac. Like it's going to be next to impossible mathematically. So I'm a big conversations to conversions guy. Like I'm like, you could pretty much predict your annual production by telling me how many over a 20-day period, work period, how many calls you had. If your average is 7, I hate to break it to you, but if you've had about 7 conversations a day for 20 days, you're going to do about 7 units a year. And if you want to get to 14, you're going to have 14 conversations a day. And it's like the inconvenient truth, right?
That's so to go back to the original question, because I think it's a great one. Like, what stands in the way? Why will people not necessarily go double their effort? And I'll tell you, my assessment, my belief, and my personal experience is that your current version of you, like your current self, is at odds with your future self, right? Like, your future self is the one that wants to double. Your current self, though, is pretty content. In other words, you've got to become a different version of you to get to where you want to go. So seriously, why is it so hard for us to go put in more effort? Because it's uncomfortable. We're content. We're saying stated goals, but they may not be our real goals. See, I see a major disconnect in our industry quite a bit, just sales in general. I shouldn't say it's our industry, but there's stated goals and there's real goals. We state what we think we want. We state what we think is appropriate, but our real goal is less than that. It's not as common as I'd like it to be, where your real goal ties out to your stated goal. I'll give you a really quick example of this. Last week I was talking to this younger guy, high performing real estate agent, hasn't bought a house yet, doesn't own a house himself, and he said to me, he goes, Brian, I think it's time I buy a house. Like, I've earned money. I've sold a lot of houses. Frankly, I need to own real estate. I'm more credible if I own real estate. And I said, cool, what do you want to buy? He said, I want to buy an $800,000 home in North Scottsdale. I said, cool. So let me ask you a question. If I can find that exact home that you want for $600,000 in South Scottsdale. Same square footage, same pool, same everything, but it's not in North Scottsdale, it's in South Scottsdale. It's $200,000 cheaper. Would you take it? He goes, I really want to be in North Scottsdale. I said, I know, but it's $200,000. He goes, you know what? At 600 in South Scottsdale, I'd make do. I said, cool. What if I could find that same house, 500 in North Phoenix? And we had this whole back and forth. And finally he said, you know what? If I'm saving $300,000 and I'm in North Phoenix, I'm almost in Scottsdale. Yeah, I'd be good with that. And then I said, what if it's $400,000 in Glendale, on like the west side of town? No, I can't go there. That's way too far. I couldn't do it. And I said to him, I said, Justin, in 5 minutes, I took you from an $800,000 home in North Scottsdale to a $500,000 home in North Phoenix in 5 minutes. See, your stated goal was that Scottsdale home. Your real goal is that 500 North Phoenix. You will play to that 500K home. So I give that analogy, I give that explanation because I think that we all have to get clear on what we really want. Like, is it a stated goal or is it a real goal? And that will dictate a lot of the effort we put in my opinion.
So yeah, the number one takeaway here, guys, is you have to be the future you before the future you even arrives. You have to be the person who is worthy of the results that you will eventually get. And that's so powerful. But it's also like when you look at yourself in the mirror, when you show up to your office, you've got to say, I'm that 25 unit a year closer. I dress like that person. I talk like that person. I think like that person. I feel like that person. And the only thing that doesn't feel like that person is my bank account. But every other way, my work ethic, my self-image, my belief, the way I talk, the way I walk, the way I smell, everything is 25 units a year. The only thing that's not there yet may be my bank account. But if you are that person, Brian, the money's going to come, yeah?
Are you willing to become that person? Is a big question we should all be asking ourselves. Am I willing to become the person that wants to achieve these goals that I'm saying I want to achieve? And I want you to be honest with yourself. Like, look in the mirror and say, am I really willing to do that? Because what's it going to take, Joe? You know, right? All of you guys here know. It's a different environment. Who you're hanging out with is different. What you're reading is different. Your morning routine looks different. Your nightly wind down looks different. Your calendar looks dramatically different. Like, we could go on and on and on. The reality is a guy or girl that does 20 units lives a different life than a guy or girl that does 60 units that lives a different life than someone doing 120.
And the life we're talking about is it's not the spending habits. It's like I want to live the life of the guy that makes $100 million a year in the sense of like traveling and vacations and spending. But I've got to become the person who acquired that, not necessarily the person who possesses it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, I can't spend like a $10 million a year producer on $100,000 a year budget, but I've got to produce like a $10 million a year producer, or else I'll always be on a $100,000 budget.
You got to, I love that. You got to remember too, like when you take a high producer, they're a high producer, meaning they're different than the status quo, right? So they're doing things that are different that I would define as weird, right? They got to be weird. I know that sounds like a funny word to use, but what is the definition of weird? Doing things different than the status quo. So if you want different results in the status quo, if you want to have, you be the top 1%, you've got to be doing different things than everybody else. So I actually think all of us should be looking in the mirror and saying, what makes me weird? How am I different? And if you don't have an answer for that, then I would say you better figure out a way to get weird. Again, what I'm saying is, like, when everybody else is watching Netflix, what podcasts are you listening to? When everybody else is sleeping, what is your routine in the morning? And we could go on and on. I'm not saying go get in the cold plunge, though I am a big fan of that. But there are things. And when it comes, let's get back to the real estate game. What's weird? What's considered weird? I know nobody thinks it's weird. Go into any brokerage office. Everyone knows they're supposed to be lead generating first thing in the morning. Why can you go into a 300-person brokerage and only find 10 people lead generating? Where are the other 290? Like, Every book written on real estate success says create business in the morning. Right, Joe? I mean, you've read pretty much every
Yeah.
one.
Yep.
And yet you're an outlier if you're doing it day in and day out. So again, I know the very first thing we said was double your effort, but I think a lot of it has to do with, becoming the person you need to become in order to get to where you want to go. And are you willing to do that?
Well, one thing to point out, Brian, before we move on to number 2, I noticed even just on this call, about 5 people turned their cameras on as soon as you said that, because people are like, all right, I got to show up. Right. And so like, that's cool. Taking immediate action, just going like, all right, I'm going to be different. And so good on you guys that recognize that. A few of you commented in the post, like, I just got called out. If you don't like getting called out, it's going to be very hard to be the person you ever want to be. Like my wife and I have had some hard conversations where she said some gnarly things to me. And I'm always like, oh, it's going to take a minute to get over that one. But I'm so grateful. Angie, you're on this call. You and I have had some hard conversations. And I'm like, dude, Angie, it's always so good when we do this because we always improve and get better. If I don't want to look in a mirror, if I don't want to get on a scale, if I don't want to check my bank account, like I can only hide for so long. So Brian, good on you for calling us out on that. And good on you guys who took action and said, all right, cool. I'm going to step up and be a little better.
Joe, real quick before we move to 2, what's going through my mind right now is I'm thinking of all the changes that we have to make to get to where we want to go. What I've found with most people I'm working with, and even found it with myself, the hardest thing, probably the environment, specifically the relationships. In that, if you want to get to a certain place, the reality is you are going to outgrow certain relationships, and you're going to have to be okay with it. That's really freaking hard. Like I remember when the light bulb went off for me. I'm 45 now, and I was a little late in that it took until I was about like 31 before I'm like, okay, time to get serious. And I remember having a buddy of mine, guy I grew up with, played football with, one of my best friends, and he was always at my house. He was always on my couch. And I remember saying to him one day, dude, I love you. And our goals are not the same. Like I love you just the same, but you and I are going to be spending a little less time together. It was a really hard conversation, and he didn't understand, and I didn't do a great job explaining it. He thought I was too good for him, and that was not it at all. I just had decided I want to go somewhere different. And if you're not along, for the ride with me, then you're kind of pulling me back like those crabs in a bucket. We've all heard that analogy. It's like crabs pulling one another down. You are going to outgrow relationships, and it's going to have to be okay, which means we've got to be seeking an environment. We've got to be getting into our next group of 5. The funny thing is, though, when you talk about your next group of 5, Joe, I think you and I chatted about this one time. It's kind of a comical thing. Like everyone says, you got to, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your income is the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So you try to go get in a new group of 5. But what nobody ever talks about is that when you're trying to get into that group of 5, remember, that group is trying to sprint away from you. No one ever calls that, like, I want to be in a group of 5 that's bigger and better than me. That group is trying to do the same thing. They're running from me while I'm running to them. So then the question becomes, how do I run fast enough to catch them before they get away? Which is really about, maybe manipulating, I'm not using that as a bad word, but being the one that creates, say, the dinner party that they're all at, or being the one that's hosting the mastermind that they're all in, or whatever it may be. I've got to manufacture the environment so that I can catch them. So I've got to be ahead of it.
I love it.
I know I'm off on a tangent. I just want everyone thinking about.
You're good. Well, dude, I full disclosure, I left so when you grow up, so you grew up in Arizona. I grew up in Vegas. You grew up in Vegas. All my friends are still in Vegas. And I left a 5-person group text over the weekend where I was just like, guys, like, no offense, man, but I just can't do this anymore. Like, I just can't. I I opened my phone and there was like 36 text messages about complete garbage. And I was like, dude, I'm not better than you guys, but I need to be better than you guys. Like, I don't know how to say it. I didn't say that, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm not better than them, but I'm better than this. And that sometimes it helps to separate that, because it's not about judging people and stepping on them. It's about going like, I'm not better than you guys, but I'm better than the way you're choosing to talk, the things you're choosing to talk about, the thing you're choosing to do. And so like, I'll tell you one way to apply this is in all of our real estate offices, there are the water cooler beers and moaners, and they just, nothing's ever fair enough. The leads aren't good enough. The office isn't cold enough. The water's not pure enough. Like, it's just like, you have to say like, guys, it's not about being better than you, but it's just, I'm not going to show up to the same water cooler and complain about the same crap every day. I'm not going to talk about how the world's unfair. I'm not going to talk about how interest rates aren't low enough. I'm not going to talk. I'm going to choose to elevate, not necessarily myself over you, but I'm going to choose to elevate my conversations. I'm going to choose to elevate my actions. I'm going to choose to elevate my life higher than the life you're choosing to live. And guess what? If you ever run to catch up with me, like, you're totally welcome back. But I just can't do the same stupid complaining about the gods must be crazy. If you ever saw that movie, like complaining about where the Coke bottle came from. You can't be that. Like, you've got to be a little bit better. And I made that choice, like, just practice what you're preaching this weekend. And they all hit me up like, bro, no, don't leave. And I'm like, dude, I just can't do it anymore. It's a drain on my soul. And they're like, all right, cool, man. We'll just catch you later. And I was just, see you guys. Like, and it wasn't about, to your point, it wasn't about being better than them. It was just about talking on a higher level and thinking on a higher level than they were choosing to talk and think about after 40 years.
You got to become a different person if you want to get different results, right? If you want to get to a different spot, what got you to where you're at right now is not what's going to get you to where you want to go. It's just not, if your goals are big enough.
Right.
Let's go to the second thing I think we should all be thinking about if we want to really grow our business this year. Joe, you already alluded to it earlier. We've got to increase our conversion rates. Now, that's a very broad statement. What do I mean? What I found is that most agents do a pretty poor job tracking all of the lead measures that create the lag result. In other words, if I ask somebody about their business, they generally are going to tell me about their closings. Maybe they'll tell me about their pendings. But what I want to encourage everybody to do is make certain that you're tracking everything that occurs before you actually have something that's pending. So that's contracts, obviously written. That's listings, buyer or seller signed. That's appointments gone on. That's appointments set, right? That's adds to the database. That's phone calls made, right? So conversations lead to adds to the database, lead to appointments set, lead to appointments gone on, leads to listings, buyer listings or seller listings signed, leads to ultimately to contracts. Now, why do I share that? I think we know these things, right? What I find though, is that a lot of realtors, we don't function as true business people. See, all of those numbers that precede the actual contract, they tell a story. And if you're tracking those metrics, you could find where you're actually deficient. So for example, if you're having lots of conversations, but you're not adding anybody to your database, there's a problem, right? Let's work on that conversion rate, converting from phone call to add to the database. Why? What's the problem? You probably are not providing value such that they want to be added to your database for you to follow up with. Or if you're adding people to your database, but you're not setting any appointments, there's a deficiency, there's a problem. That's great, we're now aware. Now we have to fix that conversion. What would we do there? I'll tell you the number one reason people don't set appointments. Joe, it's gonna come as no surprise. What's the number one reason? They don't freaking ask for them. It's mind-blowing. The number of appointments that are not set simply because agents don't say, hey, does next Tuesday at noon or Wednesday at 9 a.m. work better for you? It's the number one reason appointments aren't set. But my point here is, I don't want to get too granular. My point here is, if you want to increase your business, you've got to increase your conversion rates on the lead metrics that drive to the contracts. But in order to increase those conversion rates, you've got to be tracking that data, acknowledging where you're deficient, and then going to seek training or support or practice, whatever it may be, to improve in that specific measure. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're talking about is triage. And like, I have friends in the medical field and I'm a hypochondriac, so I'm like dying all the time. And like, whenever I tell myself, they're like, yeah, no, you're perfectly fine. And I'm like, well, how do you know? And they're like, because I've been doing this long enough to tell you you're perfectly fine. How, Brian, when you look at somebody's metrics, so let's say dials, conversations, appointments set, appointments met, contracts. How long would it take you to triage somebody's problem when, if you saw all 5 of those numbers in front of you? 5 seconds?
Yeah, 10 seconds tops.
Yeah.
And to not only would you be able to see the deficiency, there's usually only like 2, 3, 4 reasons why we're deficient in each one of these areas. There's not a lot of reasons why we're not as successful. You know what I'm saying?
Because everything's got a number attached to it. So you should be, based on national average, if you dial 1,000 times, you should have X number of conversations. And from the number of conversations you have, let's say 1,000 dials turn into 100 conversations. If 100 conversations don't yield 5 appointments set, and if 5 appointments set don't yield 3 appointments met, and over the course of 30 appointments met, if you can't convert 20 of those, 20% of those into contracts, like you're doing something wrong. So if you see 1,000 and 100 and 0, you're like, okay, cool. We're having conversations, but we're not setting appointments. We can fix that. If you see 10 appointments set and 1 shows up, you're like, all right, cool. You're just setting fake appointments. And so it's just like the scale, the bank account, the mirror, whatever it is. We have to be willing to look at what we're doing effort-wise to ever be able to improve upon them. But Brian, I think it's fair to say most agents don't want to know their numbers. They don't want to know. Like, I think a lot of us who are in practice of selling real estate would be frightened if we actually knew how few conversations we're having with ready, willing, or able buyers. Yeah. Like, we would freak out. We go, because then we would realize that, I'm like, man, I'm only having 2 unique conversations a day with ready, willing, or able buyers, but I want to close 45 transactions in a year. It is at that point a mathematical impossibility. You would have to close 100% of every human being that ever heard your voice in order to reach that number. Yet it's like we have these goals, but we don't want to know the numbers that lead to those goals.
I mean, again, it's the blessing and the curse of our industry in that, we just do not act as business people to the extent that we should. And I say it's a blessing and a curse because it's a blessing in that the vast majority of our competition is not going to do it. And if we do it, we will excel and our opportunity is truly unlimited. The curse, unfortunately, is poor business people represent us in the field. My point here, though, is if you know your numbers, and Joe, you nailed it. If you know your numbers, you know exactly what to correct. Like to go back to the example you gave, if you're setting 10 appointments, but only one's showing, yes, you could be setting bogus appointments. Maybe that's it. Or maybe whatever you're saying isn't valuable enough for people to feel like you're good, like the appointment's worth having. Or maybe you need to introduce some sort of pre-appointment phone call, or maybe you need to send some sort of FedEx to the house to encourage them, whatever it may be. If you know the data, you can solve. If you don't know the data, then you're just guessing. I don't understand why we'd want to run something that's not data-based.
For sure. So I had a conversation one time. There's this human being that's in my world that I just admire. He's just one of the nicest people. He like brings my kids little packages of stuff on their birthdays, and he's just thoughtful and kind. And I said to somebody one time, I was like, dude, I just want to be like that person. And guys, listen to what I'm about to say. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, Joe, you would never want to pay the price that person paid to become the person that they are. He was talking about his life experience. He was talking about some of the trauma he'd gone through, whatever it was. And it hit me so hard. It was almost 20 years ago he said that to me. Think about it this way, guys. We want to make doctor and lawyer money. Yeah. Like, I make more money than a lot of my friends that are doctors, but we don't want to pay doctor and lawyer prices. Now we could go, well, wait a minute. Like, none of my friends that are doctors work more than 3 or 4 days a week. Okay, that's cool. They paid a price you never paid. All of my friends that are doctors, when I was grinding and buying houses and driving Hummers when we were like 22 years old, they were poor college kids eating ramen. They were paying a price that I didn't have to pay. But when I was making $150,000, 4 years into my career. They got into their career and at year 4 were making like 800,000 because they had paid a price to get into an environment that I never paid. So here's the cool thing, guys. We don't have to go to 8 years of school, but we do have to pay a price. And the price that we have to pay is self-evaluation, commitment to standards, because Brian, I'm sure you'll talk about the difference between goals and standards, commitments to standards, and like I would say true honesty and personal integrity. We have to pay that price. And then we have to know we can get what they have, but we have to pay a price to get it. And the price we're going to pay is not sitting through classes and taking exams. The price we have to pay is grinding and personal examination, which is a completely different price than a lot of them. Because a lot of my friends are like, they're not even great in their field. It's just the floor is so high when you're a dentist. You're like, dude, if you're a dentist and you're not making 250 grand a year, you're some sort of maniac. Like, it's just the floor is so low. The problem is our floor in real estate is $0. Our ceiling is really high. We all know multi-million a year producers. I don't know any dentists that are making $5 million a year. I know a lot of real estate professionals that are doing it. So our ceiling is amazing, but the problem is our floor is so freaking low. So sorry, Brian, but anyways, it was
No, it's good. The takeaway, it's supposed to be hard. I love the analogy around, attorneys and heart surgeons and our ability to make more money than individuals like that have paid such a price. It makes me take a step back and say, yeah, man, this stuff is supposed to be hard. We should be grateful that it's this freaking hard because that's what creates the financial opportunity. Right. So I look at, I don't want to go down the path of NAR and all that stuff today. I'm sure we've had plenty of you guys are all tired of that conversation. But yeah, I mean, would I prefer to not be dealing with that stuff? Of course. But every time something difficult comes up and it shakes the industry up a little bit, I'm not going to lie. I take a step back and say, okay, good. This is last time things really got shook up in 7, 8, 9, 10. It worked out okay for me. So
100%. Well, so Days of Thunder, and then we can move on to number 3. Days of Thunder, right? Cole Trickle, he just had to go on the high side and hit the gas.
Just floor it.
Because of the trauma he had been through, he was so afraid to do it. But when he did it, he came out on the other side. That's where we're at. And Ange, and those of you who are on our team, you remember when COVID hit, we were like, no, we're not doing this. Taylor and I had been through the recession. We had lost everything. We had foreclosed houses and had trucks repoed. And I was like, I'm not doing that again. So we were home. We worked from home for like 3 days. And then we're like, all right, everybody, get back to it. We could stay 5 feet away from each other. We could do whatever. I don't care. We're working. And then we saw this exponential growth in our business. And to your point, Brian, there's this wreck ahead of us. And for those of us who are willing to go like, oh, it's not break time and seatbelt time and sit there and wait for the crisis to be averted. It is put our foot on the gas, slam through this freaking thing and come out on the other side. And while everyone else is dealing with the car crash, we're going to have blue ocean or wide open track ahead of us.
Yeah. I haven't heard a Days of Thunder analogy used in a while, but I appreciated the timeliness of that.
Dude, you're going deep tracks if you get into Days of Thunder.
You dropped Cole Trickle on everybody. I mean, that was a powerful quote. So that's good. The third thing, Joe, that I'm thinking about in terms of doubling business or just improving your business this year, add leverage. Add leverage. Now, in order to add leverage, I want to take a step back. I think everyone here must know their dollar per hour. You should be able to calculate, or you should know off the top of your head right now what your hourly wage happens to be. Does everyone here know their dollar per hour?
Yeah, give them a math equation, Brian, of how they could figure.
No, I mean, I take your GCI, right? Take the number of hours you work. Let's call it, 50 hours. I'm sorry, 50 weeks, 40 hours. It's 2,000 hours on a year, and just divide it out. Or if you work more than that, maybe you'd work 2,500 hours. We're realtors, so you probably work 3,000 hours, whatever it may be. Just divide your total GCI by the total number of hours you've worked over the past 12 months. Come up with
just to give you guys a cheat, a $250,000 a year earner at 2,000 hours of work makes about $125 an hour. So if you make 500,000, you're at 250, 750s at 375. $1 million a year is $500 an hour.
So thanks for doing that. I want you to start with knowing your dollar per hour, because once you know your dollar per hour, you can more objectively look at how you're managing your time. Some of the best advice I ever got, Joe, this is going to sound so ridiculous, but one of the best bits of advice I ever got from a mentor of mine. He said, Brian, you need to start buying your dog food on Amazon. Now, that doesn't sound like anything earth-shattering, right? But he said to me, he said, you've got those dogs of yours. What's your process for buying dog food? I go, I go over to PetSmart once a month, pick up 2 40-pound bags. It's a couple miles from my house. He's like, I'll spare you all the detail, but he's like, what's that whole process take you? I'm like, ends up taking about an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours sometimes, because I go into, I want to bring the dog wants to run around PetSmart. I let him, I think my dog picks out a toy. I make a whole process out of it. It's fun, whatever. I'm like, it's probably 2 hours of time. I said, Brian, you're making a couple $100 an hour. That trip to PetSmart cost $400. When you could order your dog food in 1 minute off of Amazon. How could you better use that time? Now, he was being funny, but the point he was making is that there are so many areas in our life where we are doing the activities that are well below our dollar per hour. And he would have said to me, outsource that, hire for it, create leverage so that you could be spending time on your highest dollar per hour activity. When I say add leverage, what I'm thinking about is some of you need admin support or transaction support. You're way too in the weeds. You're making $125 an hour, but you're doing work that's $15 or $20 an hour. Some of you should use a showing assistant because your highest and best use is in negotiating contracts, not necessarily showing properties. Now, so many people are so resistant to making that hire or using a showing assistant because they don't want to give up a portion. And I'll tell you, the only people that should ever be fearful about giving up a portion are those that would give it up, but then not use that new time wisely. Like if you're going to go give up a portion of it, and then you're going to go play Madden on PlayStation, yeah, that's not going to be a very fruitful, use of your time. But if you give up, showing houses for 3 hours and you reallocate 2 of those 3 hours to making 20 new conversations and your ratios, and now that leads to 2, 3, 4 new appointments, then it's money well spent. My point here is, Joe, real quick, if you want to increase your business, you've got to be smarter with your time. You've got to understand your dollar per hour. You've got to act like a business person again, and you've got to leverage where appropriate.
So there's so much freedom in this, guys. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. We got from Brian, one of the best pieces of advice Taylor and I ever got is you guys need to decide what your value is in getting into your opportunity value. Meaning, if you're going to put some weight behind something, what is the minimum amount you're going to receive in order to justify the activity? Let me break it down in real world. We're a part of 2 title joint ventures. We do one with Real, and they're still kind of dialing theirs in. And then there's a local title JV we're a part of. Well, I got a call from a chick out of Phoenix, actually, on Thursday, I think. And she was like, hey, we want to partner with you guys, blah, blah, blah. And I just told her, it gave me the freedom to just straight up say, like, to be honest with you, here's the needle. If you can't move that needle sufficiently for me to even care about this, it's just not even worth us having the conversation. So it's the same thing. When a new opportunity comes to you, your opportunity cost may be, if you can't add $50,000 to your net income at the end of a year, it may not be worth you getting involved in. So somebody comes to you and is like, hey, I want to run a podcast with you, and I want to do this and I want to do that. You've got to be able to run down the gamut and go, okay, best case scenario, this new opportunity is going to bring into my life $10,000, but it's going to take 20% of my time. And if you're making $200,000 a year, you'd have to understand 20% of your time is $40,000. So would it be worth taking 20% of your time on a new venture that takes you from 200 to 210? Not really, because it's going to be really hard to maintain 200 if you take away 20% of your time. So it's like that principle of leverage applies to offloading less profitable opportunities, but also denying insufficient opportunities to justify the use of your time. Am I right, Brian?
You nailed it. I mean, you can only do what you just did because you know exactly what your time is worth. And by the way, Joe, ironically, big industry, small community, I know exactly who you talked to last week about typing. I ran into her on Friday and it was just super, super random. So
Did she tell you about our conversation in which I said, like, to be honest, if I can't make it X, it's not even worth our conversation. She's like, well, I can't make you X. I was like, all right, well, have a great day.
what you said tied out exactly to what she had shared with me. So yeah, it's
That's
pretty
awesome.
funny. I forgot about that. All right, before we run out of time, I'm not going to spend that much time on this one. Number 4, stop being a secret agent, gang. You want to do more business, stop being a secret agent. I don't have to say anything more other than the fact that so many of us run around and the people closest to us don't even know what it is we do for a living. I had someone last week say to me, oh, Brian, I didn't even know you were still selling real estate. I mean, I knew you were in the real estate game, but I didn't know you were like still a realtor. I'm like, what the hell do you think? What do you think I do? And whose fault is that? It's not theirs.
100%.
It's my fault. It's my fault.
Yeah.
Number 5, stop trying to be a generalist. Stop trying to focus on every aspect of the business. What I have found, and Joe, I think you may say the same, and many of you here today might say this, figure out what your specialty is, or in fact, if you have a niche, and then double down or triple down on that. An example of that, like I mentioned, short sales, distressed property, that's where my career started. But as the game evolved, at some point we decided to become the expired home experts, where I would call and say, hey, lots of agents work in luxury. Lots of agents work neighborhoods. I work specifically for sellers whose homes did not sell the first time around. We have a specific system to help people sell when they didn't sell the first time on the market. My point here is, and if we had more time, we'd go through this, put all of your eggs in one basket, but watch that basket closely. And become a master, become a specialist in that thing. Naval Ravikant, we call it specific knowledge. Look up Naval Ravikant in the Almanac of Naval. I think it's one of the best books out there around specific knowledge. I think if you could specialize and become a master in that thing and become known for that thing, your business will prosper. The last 2 things, Joe, I want to talk about Mike Hicks, my buddy Mike Hicks up in Idaho, Idaho Falls, Idaho. Many of you have probably heard of Mike. He runs something called the Promise Script. Anybody heard of the Promise Script? John Powers, I know you know the Promise Script. So what Mike would do, and I'm going to totally butcher it, but I think every one of us could start doing this today. You go meet with a seller and you say, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, I have a few goals for our partnership, for our relationship. Really a couple promises. Number 1, I promise that I will get you as much money for your property as quickly as possible during the life of this transaction. I will get you as much money as efficiently as possible for your property. Number 2, this transaction is going to be like hitting the easy button. I promise to you that this will be the most efficient, the easiest transaction, the easy button of transactions, the easiest transaction you've ever had. Number 3, though, that's a commitment I'm going to ask from you, Mr. Seller. During the course of this transaction, provided you see me honoring number 1 and number 2, during the course of this transaction, my expectation, your commitment to me, is that you introduce me to somebody that has a real estate question or a real estate need. Now, during this transaction, I'm going to ask you who I should be talking to. And if you haven't given me a name yet, no problem. That just means that maybe I haven't been honoring my end of the bargain. If we get to the closing table and you haven't introduced me to somebody, then I'm going to assume that means I didn't honor my end of the promise. Is that fair? Does that sound good? So I totally butchered that because I gave you like the 30-second version of it. But the bottom line is using a script with your clients that says, I'm going to do X, Y, Z for you. I'm committed to it. I promise to do it. I'm going to deliver. And when I do, or as I'm doing it, I expect you to introduce me to people that you think may have a real estate need. And if you don't, I'm just going to assume that means I didn't perform. Can I count on you? And then anchoring that with a handshake is an incredible way to build your referral business. It's something all of us could be doing easily. Does that make sense, Joe?
100%. All right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we got one more. Yeah.
Yeah. Very last thing. Again, no surprise here. Every one of us here, our number one source of business is our SOI. It's also the number one most neglected thing in our business world. I don't care who you are. There's never been an SOI that I've looked at, a sphere of influence that I've looked at that I've said you are nailing it 100%. Never. And what do I see missing? Frequency of interaction, consistency of interaction, and quality of interaction. We're too infrequent, we're too inconsistent, and we lack value. We lack quality. So if you want to increase your business, what I want you thinking about is how can I interact with everybody that matters to me in my SOI roughly every 17 to 21 days. And I don't care how you do it. If you're frequent enough, like everybody knows what you guys do. If you send an email, your email signature says you're in real estate. If you post on Facebook, your profile probably says you're in real estate. If you send a note card, your letterhead says you're in real estate. I don't need you asking everybody, who do you know that wants to buy or sell? I just need you to be more frequent and consistent with your interaction. So if you want to increase your production through your SOI, every 17 days, figure out a way to interact, to touch. And again, don't be annoying. Pepper phone calls with some texts, with some Facebook messages, with some cards, with some client events. Then you don't have to get crazy. You just got to be freaking consistent. Because absent that, that person gets stolen from you. My job every day, Joe, is to wake up and take people out of your database. Your job every day is to wake up and take people out of my database. That's what our job is. Doesn't mean we don't love each other. That's just that's what the nature of the game is.
Yeah.
So I got to build a moat around my people.
I love it, man. There's been so many great things. We're at a time we could go on for hours. Here's my two thoughts, guys. Number one, I'm pretty convinced that there are millions and millions of men on the earth that would love to treat my wife the way I should be treating her. And if I'm willing to treat my wife as if it is our first date, day after day after day, we will have a great relationship. I've always been amazed by the fact that husband, I'll pick on husbands will be Casanova on date number 1 and complete neglector on year number 10. And so I always remind myself mentally, like, dude, how would I approach this interaction with my wife if it was literally our first date and I was trying to earn her affection? Now, if I can take that same game plan to the clients I've already got, because there is this thing of going like, okay, cool, I've got this. The hunter-gatherer in us is like, I've got this, let me go get more. What if we say like, I've got this and let me keep it? And with our SOI, that's the game. Number 2, Adriana is going to be posting shortly the image on our Instagram, on my Instagram. And all you got to do is just comment down below, give Brian a shout out, let him know what your number 1 takeaway was, because we don't have time to do it here. And she will text you instantly a copy of the recording of this. I don't know about you, but I need to watch this over and over and over again, because in this brief conversation that Brian and I had, complete masterclass. Now, again, if you could apply all 7, great. But the last hour of your life has been completely useless unless 1 or 2 of the things that were talked about are actually applied in your life. And that's the complete key. Amy, anything in closing?
No, I was just going to say, take action. Success loves speed. So pick the 1 or 2 and actually implement. That's the key. You're right.
Love it. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Brian. So good. See you guys next Monday, same time.